Texas Republican Congressman Ron Paul is under attack by the entity he's been attacking, the Federal Reserve. St. Louis Fed Vice President David Andolfado writing that Congressman Paul is, quote, a pinhead, that his arguments against the Fed are, quote, stupid. So who's right, Ron Paul or the Fed? To my freedom fighters, Fox Business Stocks editor and my colleague Elizabeth McDonald, Cato Institute senior fellow Dan Mitchell, and radio talk show host Nancy Skinner. Nancy, to you first. I know that you don't agree with Congressman Paul's argument that we should end the Fed. You sometimes, I think, have expressed some willingness to join his argument that we should audit the Fed. But is it appropriate for officials of the Fed to call him silly names in public when he's advancing a perfectly acceptable and now mainstream political view?
Well, I don't know if it's mainstream, but the particular Fed officer said it really hurt him to do that because he's a libertarian. So, as we are. Yes, I agree with Ron Paul on one point. This institution is so large and so powerful, they should be audited because they're a giant business, so that should happen. But the stuff that Ron Paul says about the dollar being, it should be like what it was a century ago in an agrarian age, $1, and we should be able to buy that. That is silly stuff to say. It's all relative, Judge. Your purchasing power is relative to the monetary value. Our standard of living has continued to increase. That's what you look at. Just going backward.
Right.
It's like saying, I don't want any calendars because I'll look younger.
All right, I got you. You look young enough, Nancy. I got it. Dan, the argument that Ron Paul makes is as statistically sound as a bell. From the time of the founding of the country to the institution of the Federal Reserve, the value of the dollar went up 8%. From the institution of the Federal Reserve to the present, the value of the dollar went down 92%. Nobody, not Nancy, not Ben Bernanke, can refute that.
Of course they can't, because the facts are what they are. And the key question, hearkening back to Nancy's point, is maybe our standard of living would have gone up even faster and even greater if it wasn't for bad monetary policy by the Fed. I think this official from the Fed is trying to play a game. He's trying to pick an argument about the technical details of monetary policy, should we do QE2 or not, for instance, and using that to distract from what Congressman Paul is asking for, which is simply to get transparency and more information by auditing the Fed. And I think, it's maybe a clever political ploy, but he's being very unfair to the congressman.
Congressman Paul's proposal to audit the Fed in the last session of Congress had a majority of senators and a majority of members of the House of Representatives behind it. You couldn't have predicted that 10 or even 20 years ago when he started agitating about let's audit the Fed. So it's sound, it's mainstream, even Democrats like Nancy Skinner want. So why is the Fed calling him stupid?
That is a wrong path to take, and you're absolutely right, Judge. And look, I'll tell you something. They're talking about what the good congressman is saying, audit the monetary policy of the Fed. I think Americans see this discretionary monetary policy as set by the Fed. The monetary policy that is put down by the central bank is only as good as the next election. And I'll tell you something. Zimbabwe has a central bank, and there's a logic lesson there. You cannot devalue your way to prosperity. And I'll tell you something else. This Fed, in terms of auditing the Fed, any student at the central bank will see that the idea to audit monetary policy started under Arthur Burns, and central bankers in Washington were for it then, too.
Nancy, you're a Democrat. You believe in transparency, and you believe in accountability. There's more transparency and accountability with respect to the CIA than there is with respect to the Fed. So shouldn't there be more transparency and accountability with the Federal Reserve, as Congressman Paul has been suggesting for over 20 years now?
Well, yes, because you know what? They have the power to affect the outcome of elections with monetary policy.
Right.
But, here's the key. He wants to end it and go further. The idea is what we've created is, with monetary policy, the ability to tame the highs and lows. So inflation and recessions by using monetary policy quite well. We've learned how to fine-tune that.
Wait a second. Hang on.
End it, don't end it.
Oh, my God.
Because she got under my skin, too. Go ahead.
Listen to me. You cannot have officials in Washington who are unelected, unaccountable, thinking that they can stage manage the economy, thinking they can, by dialing up inflation, create jobs and magic up jobs out of thin air. I'll tell you something. Listen to this. Unemployment was going down in the late 90s. Unemployment was going down in 2003 to 2007. The Fed still kept rates low. That is against what their policy was about unemployment.
I know that you're not I know you're not a psychiatrist, but why do the big government types get so furious whenever those of us who believe in the soundness of the dollar remind them that whenever the Fed floods the marketplace with cash, the price of everything goes up and value is diminished? It's economics 101. It's not a theory, it's reality.
Yeah, you create too much money, either consumer prices are going up or you're creating asset bubbles. The money has to go someplace. And this comment that we need the Fed to tame the highs and lows, it's the Fed that causes the boom-bust cycle. It's the Fed that gave us the Great Depression. It was the Fed that gave us the housing crisis. We had a much more stable monetary policy before the Fed than we've had since the Fed was created.
All right. We have a couple minutes left.
What you're not thinking about,
hang on, Nancy. I want to switch topics. I want to talk about the debt. Last month, the federal government posted its largest monthly deficit in history, a $223 billion shortfall in just a 28-day month. That shortfall just for the month of February. It dwarfs even the steepest budget cuts being debated. Maybe that's because Democrats and Republicans apparently don't know how to do simple arithmetic. Democrats first touted a $6.5 billion in cuts, but it turns out their proposal only cuts $4.7 billion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Is there anybody in Washington who knows how to count? And regardless of the actual number, isn't every one of these proposed cuts completely inconsequential in the face of a $14 trillion deficit, Nancy Skinner?
It's all about making progress on this. Now, the Republicans promised to cut $100 billion, and they're at $60 billion.
Right.
So, talking about who's off their mark a lot, and the key is when do you do it, Judge? Because when you dry up the spigot right now, just as we are recovering, that's my point. Growth is just as important to the Fed and to our economy, growing jobs, and all these cuts. Explain to me the CBO numbers of the jobs that will be laid off when all this money dries up. Then what do we do when we're in this downward spiral?
Does Nancy understand that for every dollar that the government takes and spends, that's a dollar less that private industry can and persons can invest and produce wealth with?
Yes, that's a key point. And, you know, I got to tell you something. We're spending a lot of taxpayer money on so-called shovel-ready jobs. I think Milton Friedman, the economist, had it right. Why not making these jobs with spoons, where they have to do the jobs with spoons? If you care about creating jobs in this country, you create more jobs that way. But I'll tell you something. Nancy Pelosi, when she took office as Speaker of the House, since that time, the government has added $4 trillion in debt.
Wow. Dan, we got about 30 seconds left. I don't think the Democrats and the big government Republicans will ever come to reality on this. Do you?
We have a big challenge. Government has doubled in size during the Bush-Obama years. They're basically two sides of the same coin there with those two politicians. We need to at least turn the ship of state around and begin to shrink the burden of government. The deficits and debt are just a symptom of the underlying problem of a federal government that is doing things that our founding fathers never wanted Washington to be involved with.
Never wanted Washington to be involved with. Is this a hopeless case?
No, it's not a hopeless case.
The general welfare
America
of the
has always reinvented itself, and it will again.
15 seconds. Go ahead, Skinner.
Right in the Constitution, to promote the general welfare of this country. When you don't have a job, that's more important. Every poll shows people want to work and be productive.
Government is destroying jobs.
I got the argument. We're arguing from different ends of the polls, but I got the argument. Thank you. Nancy Skinner, Dan Mitchell, EMAC, it's a pleasure. Up next,